In the year 756 AD, a woman was brought before a Taoist priest in the city of Chang'an. She had not slept in 11 days. Her family said she spoke in voices that were not her own, sometimes a child's whisper, sometimes an old man's growl, sometimes a sound that resembled no human speech at all. She clawed at her own skin until it bled. She recognized no one, not her husband, not her children, not her own reflection. The priest listened to the family's account. He observed the woman, noting how her eyes darted to corners of the room where nothing stood, how she flinched at sounds no one else could hear. He had seen this before. Many times, he knew what was wrong with her. She was possessed, and he knew how to cure her. The priest reached into his robes and withdrew an object that gleamed in the lamplight. It was a mirror, but not an ordinary mirror. Its surface was darker than polished bronze, almost black with a strange liquid shimmer that seemed to move even when the mirror was still. Around its rim were carved characters and symbols, trigrams from the Book of Changes, images of the four directional animals, the names of gods and spirits. This was a demon, revealing mirror. The priest held it before the woman's face and began to chant. What happened next was recorded by witnesses and preserved in temple archives for over 1,000 years. The woman screamed. A sound, they said, that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her throat. She convulsed so violently that 3 men could barely hold her down. Foam appeared at the corners of her mouth. Her eyes rolled back until only the whites were visible. And then, suddenly, she went still. When she opened her eyes again, she was herself. She recognized her husband. She asked for water. She had no memory of the previous 11 days. The demon, the priest explained, had been driven out. The mirror had revealed its true form, and once revealed, it could not remain hidden in its host. It had fled back to whatever darkness had spawned it. The family paid the priest handsomely. They commissioned a copy of the mirror for their home to prevent future possessions. They told everyone they knew about the miracle they had witnessed, and the priest moved on to his next patient. This scene, or variations of it, played out countless times across China for over 2,000 years. The demon-revealing mirror became one of the most iconic objects in Chinese spiritual practice, a weapon against the invisible forces that were believed to cause madness, illness, and misfortune. But here is what no one understood at the time. The mirror itself may have been causing the very symptoms it claimed to cure, and the exorcisms that seemed so miraculous may have been something far stranger than anyone imagined. To understand the demon-revealing mirror, you first need to understand what mirrors meant in ancient China. We take mirrors for granted today. They're everywhere. In our bathrooms, our cars, our phones. We glance at them a dozen times a day without thinking. They show us ourselves, nothing more. But for most of human history, mirrors were objects of profound mystery. Think about it from the perspective of someone who has never seen one. You look into a pool of still water and see another person looking back at you. They move when you move. They mimic your every gesture, but they're not you. They're reversed, inverted, a copy that exists in a world beyond the surface. What is that world? Who is that person? Are they real? These questions haunted ancient peoples everywhere, but the Chinese developed particularly elaborate answers. The reflection, they believed, was not merely an image. It was connected to the soul. The mirror was not merely a tool. It was a portal. The earliest Chinese mirrors date back over 4,000 years to the Neolithic period. They were made of polished stone or jade, and they were rare, precious objects, found almost exclusively in the tombs of the elite. By the Shang Dynasty around 1500 BC, bronze mirrors had appeared. By the Han Dynasty, they had become widespread, though still expensive. These mirrors were not like modern glass mirrors. They were made of bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, polished to a high shine on one side and decorated with intricate designs on the other. The reflecting surface was never perfectly clear. It showed a dim, slightly distorted image, as if you were looking at yourself through murky water. This imperfection was not seen as a flaw. It was seen as a feature. Because the mirror did not show the ordinary world. It showed something deeper, something truer, something that the naked eye could not perceive. The decorations on the back of these mirrors were not merely ornamental. They were magical. Patterns of clouds and dragons, images of immortals and mythical beasts, inscriptions promising long life, good fortune, protection from evil. The mirror was a talisman, a charm, a spiritual technology. And the most powerful mirrors of all were those that could reveal demons. Demon, revealing mirror or monster, illuminating mirror appears in Chinese texts from at least the Tang dynasty onward. The concept is simple. Demons, ghosts, and evil spirits can disguise themselves as humans, but they cannot fool a sacred mirror. When they look into its surface, their true form is revealed. This belief appears in countless stories, plays, and novels. In the classic tale Journey to the West, the demon-revealing mirror is used to expose shape-shifting monsters. In strange tales from a Chinese studio, mirrors reveal fox spirits who have taken human form. In local legends across China, mirrors protect homes from wandering ghosts, expose possessed individuals, and force evil spirits to flee. But the demon-revealing mirror was not just a literary device. It was a real object, used in real rituals by real priests. And it was made with a very special ingredient. The secret of the demon-revealing mirror lay in its surface. Ordinary bronze mirrors were polished with abrasives, fine sand, powderdite cloth soaked in vinegar. The process was laborious, and the results were imperfect. The reflection was always somewhat dull, somewhat distorted, but certain mirrors were different. Their surfaces were darker, almost black, with an uncanny liquid quality. They seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And when you looked into them, the image was sharper, clearer, more vivid than any ordinary bronze could produce. These mirrors had been treated with mercury. Mercury, in Chinese, literally water silver, has fascinated humans for as long as we have known of its existence. It is the only metal that is liquid at room temperature, flowing like water but gleaming like silver. It is impossibly heavy for its volume, dense enough that iron floats on its surface. It seems to belong to another world, a world where the rules of ordinary matter do not apply. The ancient Chinese discovered mercury at least 3,000 years ago, and they immediately recognized its special properties. They called it living silver, because it seemed to be alive, constantly moving, impossible to hold. They believed it was a substance of immense spiritual power, a bridge between the material and immaterial worlds. Mercury was used in medicine, in alchemy, in the preservation of corpses. The first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, was buried in a tomb said to contain rivers of mercury flowing through a miniature landscape of his empire. Taoist alchemists spent centuries trying to create elixirs of immortality from mercury compounds, killing themselves and their patrons in the process. And mercury was used to make mirrors. The process was called mercury amalgamation. A thin layer of mercury was applied to the polished bronze surface where it bonded with the copper to form a silver. White amalgam. The result was a mirror with unprecedented reflective quality, brighter, clearer, and more durable than ordinary polished bronze. But there was a problem. Mercury is one of the most toxic substances known to humanity. It is a cumulative poison, meaning that small exposures add up over time. It is absorbed through the skin, through the lungs, through the digestive system. Once inside the body, it attacks the nervous system with devastating efficiency. The symptoms of mercury poisoning read like a catalog of demonic possession: tremors, uncontrollable shaking of the hands, the limbs, the entire body. The phrase "mad as a hatter" comes from the mercury poisoning that afflicted hat makers in the 19th century, who used mercury compounds to cure felt mood swings, irritability, anxiety, depression, sudden rages. Victims become unpredictable, volatile, unlike themselves. Hallucinations, visual and auditory disturbances, seeing things that aren't there. Hearing voices, paranoia, the conviction that others are plotting against you, watching you, trying to harm you. Insomnia. The inability to sleep, sometimes for days on end. Memory loss, confusion, disorientation, the inability to recognize familiar faces or places. Personality changes. Victims become different people, withdrawn, aggressive, erratic. Family members describe them as not themselves. And in severe cases, convulsions, seizures, coma, death. Now consider the demon-revealing mirror. A priest performing an exorcism would hold the mercury-treated mirror close to the patient's face, sometimes for extended periods. The patient would breathe in mercury vapor. The priest would breathe in mercury vapor. Everyone in the room would breathe in mercury vapor. The mirror might be placed under the patient's pillow, or hung above their bed, or kept in their room for days or weeks. The patient would be exposed to mercury continuously. And what would happen? The patient's symptoms would change. Perhaps they would have convulsions, which would be interpreted as the demon fighting to remain in its host. Perhaps they would fall into a stupor, which would be interpreted as the demon being subdued. Perhaps they would experience a temporary improvement as their body adjusted to the new toxic load, which would be interpreted as the demon being driven out. The priest would declare victory. The family would be grateful. The mirror would be credited with miraculous power, and no one would connect the symptoms to the cure. But mercury poisoning alone cannot explain everything that happened in those exorcism chambers, because the symptoms of demonic possession in ancient China were not random. They followed patterns, they appeared in clusters, they spread from person to person in ways that no poison could account for. They behaved, in other words, like a contagious disease, but not a disease of the body. A disease of the mind. Modern psychiatry has a name for this phenomenon. It is called mass psychogenic illness, or more colloquially, mass hysteria. The term sounds dismissive, as if the sufferers are merely hysterical in the old sexist sense of the word. But mass psychogenic illness is a real and well-documented phenomenon, and it is anything but trivial. It occurs when a group of people develop similar physical symptoms without any identifiable organic cause. The symptoms are real, not faked, not imagined. The sufferers genuinely experience pain, paralysis, convulsions, blindness, whatever form the illness takes. But medical examination reveals no physical explanation. The cause is psychological, but psychological does not mean not real. Mass psychogenic illness has been documented throughout history and across cultures. The dancing plagues of medieval Europe, where entire towns were seized by an uncontrollable urge to dance until they collapsed from exhaustion. The June Bug Epidemic, where workers at a textile factory in the United States developed mysterious rashes and fainting spells that were eventually traced to anxiety rather than any actual insect. The strawberry with sugar phenomenon in Portuguese schools, where hundreds of students develop symptoms matching those of characters in a popular television show. The pattern is always the same. A stressful environment, a triggering event, an explanation that makes sense within the local culture, and then rapid spread, dramatic symptoms, and eventual resolution once the psychological tension is released. Ancient China provided the perfect conditions for mass psychogenic illness. Life was precarious. Famine, flood, war, and epidemic were constant threats. Medical knowledge was limited, and most illnesses had no effective treatment. Death was everywhere, and it came without warning or explanation. In such an environment, the belief in demons and evil spirits was not superstition. It was a rational response to an irrational world. If your child sickened and died for no apparent reason, what else could explain it but malevolent supernatural forces? If your neighbor went mad, speaking in strange voices and attacking her own family, what else could be responsible but possession? The belief system provided both an explanation and a solution. You were not helpless. You could fight back. You could call a priest, perform a ritual, deploy a demon, revealing mirror. You could do something. And, sometimes, remarkably, it worked. Not because the demons were real, not because the mirrors had magical power, but because belief itself has power. The placebo effect is well documented in modern medicine. Patients who believe they are receiving treatment often improve, even when the treatment is inert. The mind affects the body in ways we are only beginning to understand. But there is also a nocebo effect, the opposite of placebo. Patients who believe they have been harmed can develop real symptoms, even when nothing has actually been done to them. And there is a social dimension to both effects. Beliefs spread, symptoms spread. If everyone around you believes that a certain ritual will cure possession, and you believe it too, then the ritual may actually work, not by driving out demons, but by resolving the psychological crisis that was causing the symptoms in the first place. The exorcism provided a narrative, a story with a beginning, middle, and end. You were possessed. The priest came. The mirror revealed the demon. The demon was driven out. You are cured. That narrative, believed deeply enough, could be genuinely therapeutic. But it could also be genuinely dangerous, because the same social dynamics that allowed exorcisms to cure could also cause the possession to spread. The records of Chinese history are filled with accounts of possession epidemics, outbreaks where dozens, hundreds, sometimes thousands of people simultaneously exhibited symptoms of demonic influence. These outbreaks followed a consistent pattern. They typically began in times of social stress, during famines, after natural disasters, in periods of political upheaval. They often started with a single dramatic case, a person whose symptoms were particularly severe or whose social position made them particularly visible, and they spread along social networks, affecting people who had contact with earlier victims or who heard detailed accounts of their symptoms. The spread was not random. It followed lines of connection and communication. Family members of the possessed were more likely to become possessed themselves. Neighbors who witnessed exorcisms were more likely to develop symptoms. Villages that heard rumors of possession in nearby communities were more likely to experience their own outbreaks. This is exactly the pattern we would expect from mass psychogenic illness. The disease spreads not through physical contact, but through information. Hearing about symptoms can cause you to develop those symptoms, especially if you already believe in the underlying explanation and are experiencing significant stress. One of the most dramatic examples occurred in the late Ming Dynasty China was in crisis. A series of catastrophic famines had killed millions. Peasant rebellions were spreading across the countryside. The Manchu armies were pressing at the northern borders. The dynasty that had ruled for nearly 3 centuries was visibly collapsing. In this environment of apocalyptic stress, possession epidemics swept through entire regions. Contemporary accounts describe scenes of mass chaos. Dozens of people in a single village, all exhibiting symptoms simultaneously: convulsions, speaking in tongues, superhuman strength, insensitivity to pain. The possessed attacked their families, destroyed property, ran naked through the streets. Priests and exorcists were overwhelmed. There were not enough demon-revealing mirrors, not enough rituals, not enough practitioners to address the scale of the outbreak. Some villages reportedly lost half their population to possession, not to death, but to a state of madness from which there seemed to be no return. The authorities responded with force. Possessed individuals were restrained, imprisoned, sometimes executed as witches or sorcerers. But the repression only seemed to make things worse. The fear of being accused of possession became itself a source of stress, which triggered more cases, which led to more accusations. The epidemic only subsided when the Ming Dynasty finally fell and the Qing Dynasty established control. The new government brought stability, and with stability, the psychological pressure that had fueled the outbreak gradually dissipated. But the pattern would repeat again and again throughout Chinese history, and it continues to this day. When the West caught the same disease, the patterns we've traced through Chinese history: mercury poisoning, mass psychogenic illness, the power of belief to create and cure symptoms, might seem like relics of a superstitious past. Surely modern, scientific Western societies are immune to such phenomena. They are not. In fact, some of the most dramatic and well-documented cases of mass psychogenic illness have occurred in the United States and Europe within living memory. In 1962, in a textile factory in the small town of Manning, South Carolina, something strange began to happen. A worker on the morning shift suddenly felt dizzy. Her skin broke out in a rash. She felt something crawling on her. Insects, she said, biting her. Within hours, she had collapsed and been rushed to the hospital. By the end of the day, 6 more workers had developed identical symptoms by the end of the week. The number had risen to 62. The factory was shut down. Investigators from the U.S. Public Health Service descended on the building. They searched for toxins in the air, contaminants in the water, pesticides in the materials. They collected insects from every corner of the facility and sent them to entomologists for analysis. They found nothing. No poison, no unusual chemicals, no insects capable of causing the reported symptoms. The bugs they collected were ordinary, harmless species that had always been present in the building. But the symptoms were real. The workers were not faking. They genuinely experienced rashes, nausea, numbness, and fainting. Some were hospitalized for days. The investigators eventually concluded that the outbreak was psychogenic, caused not by any physical agent but by fear itself. The factory had recently increased production quotas, creating stress among workers. A rumor had spread about insects in a shipment of fabric from overseas. When the first worker fell ill and blamed insect bites, her co-workers' anxiety found a focus. Their bodies produced the symptoms their minds expected. The June Bug Epidemic, as it came to be known, became a landmark case in the study of mass psychogenic illness. It demonstrated that modern educated Americans were just as susceptible to collective hysteria as medieval peasants or ancient Chinese villagers. The demons had different names, but they worked the same way. But perhaps the most striking parallel to the demon revealing mirror comes from a phenomenon that swept through American communities in the 1980 to 1990. It began in 1983. At the McMartin Preschool in Manhattan Beach, California, a mother reported that her 2-year-old son had been molested by a teacher. The police sent a letter to other parents asking them to question their children about possible abuse. The questions were leading, suggestive, designed to elicit confirmation of suspicions that already existed. The children began to talk. They described being taken through underground tunnels to secret rooms where they were abused in satanic rituals. They described teachers who could fly, who transformed into witches, who sacrificed babies and drank blood. They described being flushed down toilets into hidden chambers, being taken to cemeteries to dig up corpses, being forced to participate in animal sacrifices. None of it was true. There were no tunnels. Excavations of the school found nothing. There were no secret rooms. There were no satanic rituals. The children had been led, through repeated suggestive questioning, to construct false memories of events that never occurred. But the accusations were believed. The case went to trial, the longest and most expensive criminal trial in American history at that time. Teachers spent years in prison awaiting trial. Lives were destroyed, families were torn apart, and the panic spread. Across the United States, similar accusations emerged at daycare centers, schools, and churches. The pattern was always the same. Suggestive questioning of children, fantastic allegations of satanic ritual abuse, communities torn apart by fear and suspicion. Investigators searched for evidence of the vast satanic conspiracy that the children described. They found nothing. No bodies, no tunnels, no ritual implements, no corroborating evidence of any kind. Because there was nothing to find. The Satanic Panic of the 1980 to 1990 was a modern witch hunt, driven by the same dynamics that had fueled persecution in ancient China: fear of hidden evil, willingness to believe accusations without evidence, the conviction that children, like demon-revealing mirrors, could see truths that adults could not. The children were not lying. They genuinely believed their memories. But those memories had been created through a process of social construction, shaped by the expectations of the adults who questioned them. The demon, revealing mirror, showed people what they expected to see. So did the children of the Satanic Panic. These cases reveal an uncomfortable truth. We like to believe that we have moved beyond superstition, that science has dispelled the darkness, that we are too rational, too educated, too modern to fall prey to the collective delusions that afflicted our ancestors. We are wrong. The human brain has not changed in the few centuries since the demon, revealing mirror, was last used in earnest. We are still pattern-seeking creatures, desperate for explanations, vulnerable to suggestion, capable of making our beliefs manifest in our bodies. The demons have different names now: chemical contamination, terrorist attacks, satanic cults. But the underlying psychology is identical. When we are afraid, we see threats everywhere. When we expect to find evil, we find it, even when it isn't there. When we believe we have been harmed, our bodies produce the symptoms of harm. The mercury is gone. The rituals are forgotten, but the capacity for collective delusion remains. It is not a bug in human cognition, it is a feature. And it is still with us, waiting for the next moment of fear to activate it once again. Modern neuroscience is beginning to understand how this works. The brain does not passively receive information from the world. It actively constructs our experience using prior beliefs and expectations to interpret sensory data. What we perceive is not raw reality, but a model of reality, built by the brain and shaped by what we already believe. This is not a flaw in human cognition. It is a feature. The world is too complex, too chaotic, too full of information for us to process without some kind of filtering system. Our beliefs provide that filter. They tell us what to pay attention to and what to ignore, what is significant and what is noise. But this means that beliefs can shape perception in profound ways. If you believe you are possessed by a demon, your brain will interpret ambiguous sensations: a racing heart, a feeling of unease, a moment of confusion, as evidence of that possession. The belief creates the experience, and the experience reinforces the belief. If you believe that a sacred mirror can reveal demons, and a priest holds that mirror before your face while chanting prayers, your brain will interpret whatever you see as confirmation of the ritual's power. The flickering reflection, distorted by the mercury-treated surface, becomes the face of the demon. The priest's words become a genuine spiritual battle. The resolution of the ritual becomes a genuine cure. This is not delusion in the clinical sense. It is the normal functioning of human cognition operating in an environment saturated with supernatural belief. And it explains why the demon-revealing mirror worked. Not despite being fake, because it was believed. The mercury poisoning was real. The mass psychogenic illness was real. The suffering of the possessed was real, but the cure was also real, not because it addressed the physical causes of the symptoms, but because it addressed the psychological framework within which those symptoms made sense. The mirror showed people what they expected to see, the ritual did what they expected it to do, and their brains, following the logic of belief, made it true. Let's return one last time to that room in Chang'an, in the year 756 AD. The woman who had not slept in 11 days, the priest with his mercury. Darkened mirror, the family watching in desperate hope. What actually happened in that room? We can never know for certain. The witnesses are long dead, their accounts filtered through centuries of copying and interpretation. But we can make educated guesses. The woman was suffering. Perhaps from mercury poisoning. She may have been exposed to the substance through medicine, cosmetics, or previous treatments. Perhaps from mass psychogenic illness. She may have witnessed or heard about other cases of possession and unconsciously adopted their symptoms. Perhaps from some other condition entirely, epilepsy, schizophrenia, severe anxiety, any of a dozen disorders that ancient medicine could not diagnose or treat. Her suffering was real. Her family's fear was real. Their need for an explanation, for a solution, for hope, was real. The priest provided all three. He gave them a story that made sense of the senseless. He gave them a ritual that offered agency in the face of helplessness. He gave them a resolution that allowed the woman to stop being possessed and start being herself again. The mirror was not magic. The demons were not real. But the healing may have been genuine, because sometimes the story we tell about our suffering matters more than the suffering itself. The demon-revealing mirror worked not by revealing demons, but by revealing something about human nature. Our desperate need for explanation. Our willingness to believe in forces beyond our understanding. Our capacity to make those beliefs real through the sheer power of conviction. The mirror is dark now. The mercury has long since evaporated or been absorbed. The priests who wielded it are dust, and the patients they treated are forgotten. But the questions the mirror raised are still with us. What is the relationship between belief and reality? How much of what we experience is shaped by what we expect to experience? When does a false explanation become a true cure? The demon-revealing mirror has no answers, but it reflects the questions back at us, dark and distorted, waiting for us to see what we expect to see.